Hey guys, I see you rolling in. We're gonna give folks a couple minutes to roll in. All right, give people a couple more minutes. Okay, I see you guys rolling in. We're gonna start in 2 or 3 minutes here.
Yeah, T, when you do your questions, can you maybe give me like 5 at a time or so?
Sure.
Yeah, well, if they're all like related to each other.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock. People are still trickling in here. Kelly, we got about 40 people on the call right now.
Wow.
So
Can you ask them
welcome,
how my sound
welcome.
is?
Can everybody hear? Akelo is wondering. To communicate with us, welcome to KGD's class, starting season doors. To communicate with us, please type something in the chat box. Yeah, folks can hear you really good. Folks are commenting.
Perfect.
Thanks, Daz. Thanks, Erica. And I appreciate that. I see you can go ahead and type questions in there as we go, and I'll be shooting them out to Akello. He's over in the greenhouse right now, as you can see. Hey, Miss Wendy, I see you. So let's get going. Hey, Sharon. I wish I could give you hugs. Hugs, but we can't. So I'm here in my house. I'm here in my house, and Akello's at the greenhouse. Wow, we're at 50 now. Great. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I wanted to start just start with a little poll, if you'll oblige me. I'm gonna go ahead and launch it now.
T, you got a little bit of a reverb.
Great. Can you guys see that poll up there? Oh, boom. Are you familiar with the Garden Research Program? Yes, I'm a member, or no, tell me more. Do you currently have a farm or garden? Are you getting started, or you already got one? Tell me about what you're doing there. Good, those numbers coming in, thank you. And how much do you know about starting seeds indoors? A, I know nothing, teach me. B,
Teach me.
I know a little bit, but I need more info. I am confident. All right.
Wow.
So let's see. I'll give you 2 more seconds if you want to get your votes in, and I'll share the results here. Okay. Ending the poll. Share results. 90% of the people on the call are Garden Research Program members, or they're familiar with the Garden Research Program. That's awesome. We got a couple of people who want to know a little bit more, and you will by the end of the call. Do you currently garden or farm? Akello, there's 70% of folks on the call are already gardening. A few folks, about a quarter of us, are in the process of getting started, and just a few people aren't gardening yet. All right. All right. How much do you know about today's topic? Let's see. 30% say I know nothing. Teach me. And about 65% say they know a little bit, but they need a little bit more info. And then we got 4 or 5 people who are pretty confident in starting seeds indoors. So what I wanted to do is definitely encourage you, if you are confident in this area, to chime in. If we miss something or you think something needs to be highlighted, please chime in. This is an interactive class, and we're definitely opening to learning all weekend as well. So I'm gonna stop that. If you haven't already seen the chat box there, I want to explain. You can direct I even have a question here. Can other people see our chats? You can direct your questions in the chat box when you open it. It says to all panelists, just to the other attendees. You can actually even talk to other people privately. If you see somebody on here that you might want to say hello to, you're able to do that. If you want to direct your question directly to the panelists, you can do that as well. So know that you can change the settings of who you want to see your question at the top. Okay, so everybody see that? We've got about 66 people on the call. That's awesome. We're gonna start. I wanted to make sure, if you're not familiar, Keep Growing Detroit, we are about 6 years old, and we currently operate one of the oldest programs of gardening in the city, which is the Garden Resource Program, along with a couple of other programs that we do. The Garden Resource Program, you see Akello in the greenhouse there. We provide seeds and plants for 1,600 gardens in the city. Last year, we ended the year with 1,600 people signed up, asking for seeds and plants. And we purchase seeds in bulk and package them up. And then we grow transplants. Last year, we grew between this greenhouse and the greenhouse at Earthworks together in a collaborative way. We grew about 250,000 transplants for gardens across the city. So that is a little bit about the Garden Resource Program. Of course, if you have other questions, feel free to jump in. In addition to the Garden Resource Program, another major program that we run is our education series, which you're participating in now, and our Grown in Detroit program, which helps people get to market. We also have a number of other programs. We do have youth programs. Some of them may be on the call as a part of their homework assignment. They're supposed to chime into this, and they're going to get a quiz afterwards. Our youth leaders at Keep Growing Detroit. Yep, they're here. I think they're in the house. So I had a question here. Are the pickups for GRPCs and transplants on hold? Really good question. I know a lot of people are wondering about that. We are currently working through the logistics of how we can get seeds and plants to folks in a safe manner. And so go ahead and fill out your application. When you fill out your application, it will trigger you to, you can fill that out online. I can pull up pull that up in a second. I'll make sure I drop the website in the chat box in a minute, but go ahead and sign up. The first round of people who have signed up have been communicated with about signing up for a day and time to come where we can safely keep a social distance and also get you the resources that you need. Okay, so we are still doing the pickups. That's what Akello is actually preparing in the greenhouse right now. Wanted to just say that we're offering these classes. Usually they're $3 for GRP members and $5 for non-GRP members. It's really important right now more than ever that folks are playing a part in growing their own food. And so we are strong advocates of that and are offering these classes free of charge through this crisis. And hopefully that will help some families. If you're in a position that you are able to make a donation, I'm going to leave our donation page in the chat box. If you're able to make a donation for the class, that's awesome. But we're definitely offering this free through this crisis. So If you'd like to support and you're able to support, but we know that this is really a financial hurdle for a lot of folks as well. So no pressure there. I thought we would start off with, oh, sorry, there's one more question about the pickups. For those planned pickups, will we get to choose what we get, or will we pick up? So what we're planning for, we're gonna have to set it up a little bit differently because of the situation that we're all facing. We do have, for family gardens, we do have a couple of pre-selected packs for you. And I think the community gardens are gonna get pretty much a mixture of all that we have. So when you sign up, you'll be given an Eventbrite page where you can click on time and location, a time to pick up, so that we have just a limited amount of people that we're servicing. Okay. Thank you too, Ann. We're gonna go ahead and jump right in here. We now have about 77 people on the call. Lakello, this is awesome.
Wow.
We're all eyes on you. If you don't know Akello, if you haven't seen him around, he is responsible for all of those transplants that folks pick up. So we all pitch in, but he has the numbers on what we need, and he sets the times and dates. He's our transplant manager at the greenhouse. And so he's gonna start off with a little bit of walking tour so you can see the scale that Keep Growing Detroit is growing at, and then we'll jump into a PowerPoint. So you guys wanna start us off with a little tour, Akello?
Yeah, so welcome everybody. My name is Akello Karamelko, like T said, production manager here at Keep Growing Detroit. I'm just fixing some of the habanero and celery plants that we have for you all for the Gardener Resource Program. So first and foremost, thank you for joining me today. I got a lot planned for you, and please ask all the questions. I hope I can answer them. But I want to talk about the greenhouse and our setup first. Here inside, our greenhouse is a 30 by 140 foot greenhouse. And the key things about it, settings that I have specific for our transplant production, I don't let the greenhouse get below 50 degrees, and I try to keep it from getting above 80 degrees. So that's for all those transplant people who have greenhouses and are able to like fine tune it. And then we also have some fans to help keep it aerated. The fans are off right now because we're doing our lesson. But inside the greenhouse now, we have some eggplants, jalapenos, habanero, celery, kale, collards, and oregano that's growing, and also some lettuce mix. At Earthworks right now, they have some broccoli. We have collards over here, and our Brussels sprouts here too. I'm just remembering all the things right now. And I'll be also going through the dates, different start times, and how you can really help manage that. I'll talk about the important things that come into play when growing transplants and how to like manage the growth and all of that. Here, let's go towards my office where I actually have my notes laid out for me to keep on topic. But here inside the greenhouse, we have sliding tables to help maximize space. These plants, they're in 4-packs or 6-packs. We like the 4-packs because they give the plants a bit more space, but then the 6-packs, Garden Resource Program members get more plants per pack.
Akello, you got a lot of folks saying thank you for growing.
Oh.
And your brother's on here too. He said, hey, brother.
Oh, which brother? You know, I got a bunch of brothers.
I don't want to mispronounce the name. Zakiya. Hopefully that's
Zakiya?
Zakiya.
Yeah, my sister.
Sorry, sister.
I'm like,
when I said the name, I'm like, oh, that's sister. Sorry, Zakiya. I'm sorry about that.
Wow, she like put some respect on. Okay.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Okay, and that's Molly, the farm manager. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how many seeds to start, when to start your seeds, how to start seeds indoors, how to manage transplant growth, and when to plant outside. So let's go through the PowerPoint T. But my computer closed on us, so I gotta pull that back up so I can follow along. Right. So we'll just start off with why to start plants indoors. Are you on the PowerPoint slide number 2, T?
Yep, sorry, I was muted.
Okay, gotcha. And how's the setup right now?
Looks good. Hopefully you guys can see the PowerPoint, and Anne is asking, will the PowerPoint be shared? So after everybody who registered should be receiving a copy of the entire webinar. And so that should come to your inbox, and we'll also throw it up on our website. Anne, okay.
And for the people tuning in, I also asked, the PowerPoint is, super brief, just to keep me on task. I will be sharing a lot of things just through talking, so please have pen and paper ready to write some notes. And if you need me to go back to something, please ask T to do that, and she'll let me know. All right, ready to start with the PowerPoint, T?
Okay, yep, I'm on why start seeds indoors.
All right, why start seeds indoors? Well, there's a ton of things, probably from this list right here. The one that really gets me is the spring fever. I don't know if you all can empathize. This winter was a bit long for me, so I was really itching to get out here and start doing some transplants. And I'm really looking forward to the season this year. It's looking like spring is coming a bit early, so hopefully our plants are timed just right. It's always interesting getting the timing right with transplants, but we'll see how we do. But mostly for me, personally, just starting plants or just farming in general is more of a something that I do to kind of be more self-sustaining and connect with nature, and also feed myself and eat delicious food. But let's get into the nitty gritty. So how many seeds do I need to start? So with transplant production, you can always, buy as many seeds as you want, but to really, before we get into like how to start the seeds and, how to manage the growth, we want to have a plan in place. So we need to know how many seeds we need for our garden. Some people might be planning from how many seeds or how many plants do I need to get this amount of food. So you might be thinking like, how many pounds of foods do I need to get from this tomato plant, or how much money do I need to earn from this tomato plant if you're growing food for sale. But for this example that I'm about to just talk through, for a home garden setting, let's say you have a 8x30, well, an 8x4 raised bed, and you have a 30-inch bed, 30 inches dedicated for your tomato plants. On our plan your garden sheet, T, if you could share that out in the chat for people. Our 2020 plan your garden sheet, if you could send that, that'd be great.
Yep.
On that sheet, we recommend that you space out your tomatoes 2 feet apart. And these are all recommendations. So, the plant will grow how the plant grows, something that I like to say. So all these things are really just quality of life. If you put a seed out there, the seed's gonna do what it can to grow. But for us and for our purposes, we have, we've done calculations and figured out things to really get the plants to grow for our needs. And so that's why they recommend 2 feet for your plants. So we got 8 feet to plant out worth of tomato plants. So based on our spacing, we're gonna need 4 plants. But am I gonna start just 4 tomato seeds? We need to account for germination rates. So not all of those seeds are gonna germinate. And so we need to add on a buffer to our seedings that we're gonna do. So if you got 4, typically for adding a buffer onto your germination rates, you want to multiply whatever you need by either 30%, 40%, for tomatoes, and this is all going to be based on your luck. So if you're not very good with getting tomato plants or things to germinate, you might want to double up or maybe do half as much of those seeds to get them to germinate, or to just make you, feel a little bit easier knowing that you got twice as much as you need in the pot. So if you do a 20%, multiply your 4% by 20%, you would get somewhere around like 5.2 seeds. I always say round up, so you would start 6 seeds from that. And let's say all your 6 seeds germinated. Make sure that you keep those 6 seeds, those 6 plants, because you might need them later due to some other issues that might pop up, and that we'll talk about later. So, any questions from that, from the participants?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right, moving on to the next slide. Oh, let me share this. So for the germination rates, for what I do with the garden research program, for typically for brassicas, things like your collards, kale, bok choy, I'm just multiplying those by 20% and then buying that. With eggplants, peppers, I'm doing a 50% germination buffer. And then tomatoes, I do either between 30% or 40%.
Hey, Kello, somebody was asking about where can you find those germination rates you were talking about?
So those germination rates, it's really something that's learned from experience. And so if I need to repeat that, I will. So typically, if you're gonna buy some seeds and you know how many seeds you need, just add on a 20% germination rate buffer, period, okay? Never buy exactly what you need of those seeds, because not all of those seeds are gonna germinate. And if you check on the, I guess this isn't a seed packet that has it, but typically seed packets that you buy will have germination rates written on it. And those germination rates might say 98% or 80%. So in some cases, the seed producer accounts for that, but to give you a bit more protection, it's important that you also account for that yourself in buying a little bit more seeds than what you need.
And I would say if they were older seeds, right?
Oh, well,
You have some seeds in the cabinet, you may want to bump up your buffer.
If you have some seeds in your cabinet, let's talk about that right now. So you want to do a germ test on those seeds beforehand. So depending on how many you have, let's say you just got maybe 100 seeds, just take 10 of those seeds, do a germ test on them. And to do a germ test, well, to germinate seeds, and I'm kind of getting ahead of the slides, but to germinate those seeds, you just need sunlight, heat, and water, depending on the seeds. Sometimes you might need light too. And we'll talk about ideal temperatures for specific seeds as we get further through the PowerPoint. But you want to give yourself a little bit of time before you go out there and plant those old seeds. So you want to figure out what's the viability of those seeds that are in your cabinet before you really plan on implementing them into your systems or using them in the garden. Because you might be surprised, like, oh no, what happened to my seed?
You got another question here about not growing from seeds necessarily, but growing from scraps. Like, you see people with the base onion and growing up sprouts from that or something like that. Just want to, as you're talking, if you can throw some information in about that.
Growing seeds, so just an old onion that you have and that you just saved.
Yeah, or any, anything. How do you feel about that? Do you usually do that in your home garden?
Well, not in my home garden, but definitely if you're like in a kitchen and you have house plants, reusing those, like you can reuse so many types of plants, celeries, onions, and really have fun with them. Typically, when you're cutting your onion, just save that bottom part of the plant, wherever the plant has roots sticking out of them. So like celery, that bottom part that you typically don't use, or maybe you got a piece of might not be as successful with the cabbage, but definitely with the celery or onion, just saving that bottom part, sticking it in some water, and then just put put it in front of a window, and it should start to germinate. Um, it should definitely germinate if it's in organic. You might have to make sure that it's not irradiated or something from the why I swear to the Aton. But uh, but yeah, I typically don't do that method. I'm typically starting things from seeds, but that's a great way to reuse your plants. In terms of how long it would take for you to get something that you can reuse, I don't have the experience to tell you that. All right, so when to start your seeds. So Detroit's first and last frost dates are going to be between May 1st and October 1st. So that means that typically there might be some snow or some snow this fall that might be happening anytime between, and there should also be a buffer in here. So the last frost might happen between, the first frost might happen between May 1st and May 30th. And then the last frost, yeah, I'm getting myself confused. The last frost will happen between, and sorry about that in the PowerPoint, the last frost will happen between May 1st and May 30th. And then the first frost will happen anytime between October 1st and October 30th. And if you're trying to account for climate change, we're speculating that our climate might be shifting somewhere close to Oklahoma. So our zones might be somewhere closer to that. So we might be looking at somewhere a little bit earlier of start dates, looking at like April instead of May. But typically that's not too drastic. Well, we don't have to really worry about that right now. But and this is important for different types of crops that we're starting. So if you have collards, kale, really cold hardy plants, those are plants that you're gonna be able to plant a little bit earlier, say mid-April, April 15th. And that's just because they can kind of handle the cold a lot better than our hot crops, which are tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, squash, which are things that you're going to want to plant closer to mid-May, April 15th. So the way that I plan out my seeding dates, I pretty much count out from the first day of the year. So the first week in January, that would be week 1. The next week will be week 2. And then I keep track of that. So that's like my seeding calendar. So you will have between a year, there's week 1, and then there's all the way down in the last week of December, which is week 52, I believe, or 55. And so my starting weeks for my plants, if you all have pen and paper ready, and this is for the Garden Research Program, I'm starting our leeks and onions in week 5, which is either the last week of January or the first week of February. And then I'm starting our habaneros in week 8. I'm doing our eggplant and jalapenos in week 9, and also our celery in week 9. And then I'm doing my brassicas in week 11, and those includes collards, kale, Brussels sprouts. I don't do Brussels sprouts in week 12 because they grow a little bit faster. I like to see my Brussels sprouts somewhere between week 12 and week 13. And so to figure out these weeks, just count out the weeks starting from January and then going week 1, week 2, week 3, and then you'll find them out, okay? And then our bok choy, I like to see that in week 12, along with our lettuce mix in week 12, because these things grow a little bit faster. And for reference, this week right now is week 14. Well, close to the end of week 14, I believe, or week 13. Let me check my calendar. So we're just ending week 13, and so this Monday will be week 14. And so I also like to start my tomatoes, so our sun goats, our big beef, our Amish paste, our Cherokee purple, black Cherokee, our black cherry tomatoes in either week 12 or week 13. And that's gonna give us some optimal growth. Like the things that you can really control with transplant production, well, these things that you can't control is like timing. So these are things that you have to get perfect. So starting your plants on time, trying to be in accordance with the elements and with nature. So just make sure that you're getting your timing right. Try to follow those dates. If you're doing something that's outside of a greenhouse, so those dates are for plants that are eventually going to go outside. If you're doing things for a greenhouse production or want to grow transplants for a greenhouse, your dates for your plants are definitely going to be a bit more different. Typically for field growing, I'm setting up plants so that they're ready. Cold crops are ready mid-April, and then your hot crops are ready mid-March. You can kind of skirt that a bit with the greenhouses. So you might be trying to plant your plants somewhere in March and then somewhere in April. Well, late March and late April.
You got a couple of questions about this, Akello. So
Yep.
let's try to clarify. From Kira, she said, is it too late to start early year crops like onion, leeks, celery? Now that we're in week 14.
It's not too late to start celery. I would still give it a shot. It's not too late, especially if you know what the capacity of your germination setup is. So like you can make up some of the time by having the optimal things together to help speed up that germination. But for celery, I think you're still good. But for onions, it might be a bit late. But the key thing about alliums and onion crops, you can eat them at any size. So your onion might not be as big, but it's still edible. So don't worry about that one too much. Still go for it.
So Casey is wondering, so now that we're in week 14, does that mean we can't start anything indoors right now, or what
That
can we
does not
start
mean
right
that.
now?
No. So you could still start. You can still start your tomatoes. You can still start your brassicas. The only thing that's a bit more tougher to do might be your leeks. But besides that, this is the time to starting your plants. We never know what's going to happen in nature. If you start your plants right now inside your greenhouse, you'll have things for yourself to plant at the latest late May or early June. And then with some different type of crops, you might be able to get them in a little bit earlier. Like let's say if you do a kale or something like that, you might be able to plant that mid-May. So it's still time to plant the majority of your crops. And remember that we have kind of 2 rounds of plantings, and you also have like succession plantings. So you got your fall crop planting that you can still start crops for. Well, you won't start those right now, but I would start if you're going to do a later planting. And I don't remember the weeks, but let me pull up my later weeks. I'm trying to share like all the information that I use for the protection for the garden resource program. So I'm just trying to package that for people to use. So I'm pulling up my start dates for fall crop production. That's specific to the garden resource program. All right.
Can you transplant onions from one garden to another? Is a question right here.
If those are like, so let's say in somebody's backyard, they got some wild onions that are growing that just look really delicious. Definitely, you could just pick those up, put them in there, water them in. Definitely. Any other questions before I?
Can you just, so you kind of gave out dates, but I wondered if you could help people understand how you got to those dates. Like, how did you get to week by like going backwards from when you want them? You know what I mean? Can you kind of share a little bit more about that? How you got to those weeks?
So how I got to those weeks, So when I started with Keep Growing Detroit, they had their own weeks for starting plants, and these weeks they line up with being ready for the garden research program. So the weeks that I have are when I want these plants to really look like they're most healthiest, their most beautifulest for the garden research program. So you might have different needs for your gardens, but and then also in coordinates with like how they grow inside of our greenhouse and how they grow during that time of the year. So I was working backwards, and I've been doing this since 2016 when I started. And so I had their dates, and then just looking at the transplants, seeing how they looked when they were given out to garden research program members. Some were overgrown, some were a little bit too short. And so just adjusting like, oh, that one that was too tall, I'm just gonna take it back a week. The one that was too short, I'm just gonna move it up a week. Or the one that was too short, I'm gonna do that one a little bit earlier. The one that was taller, I'm gonna do that one a little bit later. Yeah, does that clarify?
Yes, and
So
what
it's a
I
lot
think
of
you can,
experience.
yeah. I mean, you can look at when the,
Yeah, so when you typically get or purchase a seed packet, they might say on the seed packet, start this plant indoors 4 weeks before the last frost date. And so our last frost date is somewhere between May. So I typically go in between, I just do May 15th as like my first planting date for something. And then I'm just gonna count backwards, those 4 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and whatever that is, that's when I'm gonna start that plant. And so then you get your start week of whatever week that is 4 weeks before May 15th, okay? And let's see what that is exactly. So in this example, May 15th this year is week 20. So I'm just gonna go back 4 weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I would start that transplant in week 16th, which is April 12th. So that's how you will work it back. That's how they present it in when you go and buy your seeds or when you're looking at seed descriptions. So for example, if you look on Johnny's websites and you look at a tomato plant like this, they'll have some type of recommendation on when to start them indoors. And the wording will be exactly the same. Start this like 8 weeks before, etc. All right, so I'm gonna, for those that want those fall crop planting dates and weeks. So in June, this is week 24, Sunday, June 7th. I'm starting our scallions, I'm starting our fennel, and this is because they just take a little bit longer to look ready. And I'm also direct seeding cilantro into 4-packs. And then moving on. And then in week 25, the next week after, Sunday the 14th, I'm seeding our brassicas, kale, broccoli, cabbages. Let's see if there's anything else. And then those are the only things that are on my schedule for fall crop. Let's see if there's anything
do you think
else.
that there's a way that we can share those weeks with people if somebody asks?
I can just put that together.
Okay.
And
We can email them afterwards.
yeah, I could do
Okay.
that.
Great.
And again, that fall crop planting date is for our fall crop distribution, which is set to happen July 23rd and July 25th. So when you're planning out your dates and planning out how long you're gonna have these plants, you want to have that end date or that plant date in mind. And we'll also be talking about when to plant your plants outside. That's one of the reasons. All right. So getting back to the PowerPoint.
I'm on slide
Moving
5.
on slide 5. Okay. All right. So just going down the list, so we have an understanding of how many seeds to purchase, an understanding of like when to start your seeds. Now let's get into the mechanics of starting your seeds for germinating. So for a seed to germinate, you're definitely gonna need water, warm temperature, and sunlight. Um, and sunlight is like an asterisk. So depending on if that seed is like really tiny, so let's say you have something like a chamomile or a really, really soft, tiny tomato plant, sometimes like the like the ground cherries, I think those things need sunlight to germinate. And I'll show you how to account for that when you're seeding them. So for me, the main two things are temperature and water. And when I go to seed my seeds, one thing that I've started this year to really help improve those germination rates, to ultimately help get to that 100% germination rate, I've started soaking my seeds. So here I have some big beef tomatoes, and let's talk about the specific temperature. So there's certain things that you can control when you're germinating your seeds. So like, sunlight is a given. It's always going to be there, especially if you're in an outside setting. We'll talk about inside options when we get there. But water, that's something that's kind of close to a given, but you just have to manage that in a specific way. The one that's a lot easier for you to definitely control is that temperature. So plants have ideal temperatures that they germinate at, and they respond differently to that. Two different temperatures. So let's say if I had a tomato plant, it's a hot crop. So it's it likes that warmer temperature. And so I like to start this off at 80 degrees. So tomatoes, peppers, squashes, all those things in the Solanaceae family, in the cucurbit family, these are hot crops and they like to germinate at 80 degrees. And so when I'm starting this off, I have some cold water or room temperature water in here. I just boil up some water and then I'm just adding it slowly, checking it with my finger, or if you want to use the thermometer to get exact, go for it. And I'm just pouring in water in there until it's kind of warm to the touch. And this is okay for the plant. They could definitely handle it. One thing that you need to be aware of is the size of that plant and also how much water it can take, and how long it's going to be soaking. So I'm definitely not going to do this with some super small seeds like chamomile. If I wet the seeds and then try to, use them while they're wet, they're just going to be sticky all my fingers. It's not really worth it. But for seeds that are a bit more bigger, like bean seeds or brassica seeds in some cases, it's okay to soak those. With bean seeds, you also might want to nick the back of the bean seed to help it soak in some water. So you just want to break that seed coat, use a knife or something, just a little bit.
Are you just
So
using tap water when you soak those?
you can purify your water. It's not necessary. I haven't seen a huge difference. But it's always safer to use purified water, but there won't be any huge difference if you don't. So it's optional. So you just want to nick the back just a little bit to help water penetrate into that seed coat. You don't want to do it on this side. You always want to do it on the back of your bean seed or any big seed like that that has an eye on it. So with soaking your seeds, how long they're going to soak, that's something that's important because you don't want them to germinate while they're in there. They're going to get harder to handle. So these tomato plants, I typically only let them soak between 2 to 4 hours. So this is something that you could do like the day of planting, or just do it a little bit before. So you could go prep the bed, go soak your seeds, then go prep the bed, and then hopefully by the time you're finished, they're done soaking. Or wait, that's the wrong example. You can start to seed them instead of prepping your bed. What am I talking about? And then with seeds that are a bit more drier, these are going to need to soak overnight. So things like shelling peas, really thick seeds like pumpkins or things in the privet family can soak overnight and they'll be just fine. And then brassicas, I let those soak for no more than 2 hours. Any questions about seed soaking?
Yes, you got a lot of
Yeah.
questions piling up
Yeah.
here.
All right.
Do I need to soak all the seeds before I try to germinate them? And
So
what
this
is,
is optional. Oh,
mhm,
sorry, Tay.
go ahead, that's optional.
So this is
What,
optional. See?
and then nicking seeds, people are talking about that, if you
Yeah.
can discuss that.
So all these things are optional, in nature. The seed is just planted into the ground, but these are things that I'm incorporating to help get that noise out of the equation, to help guarantee that germination rate for my plants so that I know that I have all the seeds that I need for the garden research program. So this is something that I'm doing for the scale of our program and things that I'm recommending. And yeah, like nicking your seeds, optional, but it's all like this entire class to me, to get a seed to germinate, water, temperature, sunlight, that's what you need to get a plant to grow. You want to add soil to that equation. And then all these things that we're doing, we're just doing this to, make sure that that plant produces a crop for us. And these are some of the practices that I'm implementing. So I don't want to try like force things onto people, and when I do this, I'm recommending them because these are things that I use and that I've seen success from.
Are you keeping track of the water temperature the whole time?
Not the whole time. I don't want to make this something that I add to my schedule that I have to like keep track of. If you feel like you want to, get that serious about it, I like to just water it once, and then when I come back, they're ready to be used. I don't like to like overcomplicate, and when it's already an optional thing, that's going to just give us that little extra percentage of germination. I think that just adding your water once and then being done with it is fine. Any other questions?
Catherine kind of helped us with this question, but do you typically soak your corn when you're growing corn?
So I don't grow corn here. We don't grow corn here, so I have not soaked my corn seeds. But if I were to, I would. One thing that I don't have here, I have rice seeds that I typically soak before I use. So this is a practice that you can do with any type of seeds. The only thing that you have to worry about is drowning out the seeds. So when they germinate, they're going to need that air. And so making sure that they're not soaking for too long is the thing that you need to worry about.
Can folks see Akello? I have him spotlighted. Okay, some folks can. So Magda, it must be something with your particular setup. You can find the grid and put it back on your page, or open up the grid and make it bigger. So most people can see them. So play with your settings, Magda. Thanks, guys. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah. Any other questions on soaking seeds or ideal germ temperatures?
There was a question about growing rice in Michigan.
Growing rice. Well, we can definitely grow rice in Michigan. I'll say this because we do have a class that's coming up in May, I believe, at the end of May. And so if you do come to that class, and depending on the situations, if we're able to, I'm starting rice seeds for people. So if you come to that class, you'll be gifted some rice seeds from me to start, and then I'll also show you how to do that. But if you want to look it up right now on your own, you want to look up upland rice. All right, next question.
Got it. What's the temperature for beans and brassicas to be soaked at?
Yep, so for
And
brassicas,
tomatoes.
okay, yep. So the ideal germ temperature, it's gonna be the same. It's gonna be the same temperature that you soak these in. So when you're germinating them or have them in your tray, you're gonna try to keep them around this temperature. So for brassicas, they like to germinate, and brassicas are your kale, your collards, things that have the heart-shaped cotyledon leaves, their starter leaves. Those are going to be your brassicas. Those things like to germinate at 70 degrees. And then tomatoes, things in the Solanum family, the cucurbit family, they like to germinate at 80 degrees. And then you have your oddball things. Well, if you're starting spinach seeds, those like to germinate at 60 degrees.
Mhm. Can you, is it possible for Danielle to show us the germ chamber while we're talking about
Oh,
germinating?
I want to take a look at our germ chamber. Yeah, sure. All right. So this is our germ chamber. After we seed the trays, and I'll show you all how I seed my trays. They go inside of here. We have a layer of plastic to just help keep moisture inside of it. On the top of it, we have some, what is this called again? Microfiber? I forget, insulation fiberglass that goes on tops to help seal in some of the moisture. And then we just have a space heater at the bottom. And it's just not the most complicated setup. It gets us what we need. And then this white plastic here, so this is one thing that we've implemented this year. This white plastic helps block out sunlight. So if we just had the plastic wrapped around, which is the setup that we've been using for the past, since I've been here, since 2016, we just had the plastic wrapped around, sunlight could penetrate it and thus change the temperature of the germ chamber. So like during the peak time or when the sun's out, it would be like 100 degrees in here, and plants would dry out a bit faster than what we wanted. With this wrapping around it, this white plastic wrapped around it, it's blocking off that fluctuation of temperature. So we're able to keep temperatures consistent, which is important when we're trying to hit like 80 degrees or 70 degrees in there. Right now, we're keeping the chamber around 80 degrees. Currently, we have tomatoes and such inside of here, and those like to germinate at 80. Sorry, you're gonna hear some crackling for a bit. All right, here, wanna. All right. So it's just some shelves, and then we got our cedar trays on them. I'll talk about the type of trays that we're using here in a bit when we get to our demo. But I got basil in here right now, tomatoes, ground cherries, things for the garden research program. We have some fun stuff in here, some turmeric from our turmeric class. Shout out to those that were there for that. And also some ginger. But let me just talk about some details for this. So if you are using this type of setup, or if you have something similar in your house, inside of here, so there's no sunlight. Well, there's not enough sunlight for plants to grow inside, so you will get some stretching. And if you saw our bok choy out there, they're kind of stretching, but they're stretching because they're fighting for nutrients and competing against each other. But if you have something that's cutting off that sunlight, eventually your plants are gonna need that sunlight. So if you have a tray in here, let's say 20% of these tomatoes germinated, I'm gonna take them out and just put them on a heat mat outside of this, and then let the rest finish germinating so that things don't get stretched. if you are at your home setting where you don't have grow lights, make use of the sunlight. You know, these are, you know, free things that that we should be making use of, and you know, grow lights are expensive. So if you have a problem with stretching, just take your plants from whatever germ chamber and just set them in front of, or set them outside if they're a cool hardy plant and if it's warm outside. Set them in a window or set them outside and let them soak up that sun for the day, and then bring them back inside to germinate. You know, you want to try and replicate the natural flow of nature as much as possible when growing your plants. And sorry, this lesson might go on a little bit. I have a lot to share, and transplant production is something that's super intricate.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
As you're walking over there, we have a couple questions.
Yeah.
What you were saying stretching. Can you talk about what that is?
Oh, stretching. So stretching. This is what it looks like. These brassicas are stretching for different reasons. They've been in this tray too long. So this type of tray is a 10-row seeder. This is what we're using for our systems here. And we like to pack up a bunch of seeds inside of here because we need, I believe, around 7,000 bok choy to grow. So if you're like trying to perfectly space these out, we will have to do a lot of those trays. So the needs of like small plants like these celery that we have right here, these are totally fine as they are, but they are starting to stretch too, just because they've been inside of this tray too long. So you can have stretching for different reasons. Stretching because they're, you know, just growing, but they're stressed. And then you have stretching because they're deprived of sunlight. Let me see if I have a good example of that inside the germ tray. And you can kind of see that. So like inside this tray, like sunlight penetrates, but you'll start to see some of the plants, instead of just growing up straight up, they're kind of leaning towards the sunlight. And let me see if we have some. Here we go. So here's an example of stretching. So like, you know, it's really unnaturally long. So the plant is using its energy that it has inside of the seed to help that plant reach towards the sunlight. So it's really exposing itself all to reach that sun, and looks like it's been pretty successful. Usually stretch plants are kind of yellowish, but these are just some weeds that are inside of our ginger here. So this is what stretching looks like. And this is a natural thing that plants do. And this is all in the name of like survival. So it's doing the best that it can to reach that sunlight and photosynthesize and all of that. Typically, from my experience, stretching isn't the worst that can happen to a plant. If you get a plant out in sunlight, say like, you know, within a day or like a couple of days or two, like that plant should be able to recover. Like, although these bok choy here are kind of stretched, and these are the same length, these were the same length, if I plant them inside of this tray, they'll naturally recover over time. So in terms of like the damage that you could possibly do to your plants, or neglect, if you will, depriving them of sunlight isn't the worst. In my opinion, overwatering them is the worst thing that you can do to your plants, because it leads to diseases and other things that we'll talk about.
Are you planning to talk about grow lights later in your PowerPoint here? I had a question
we
about the lights. Okay, we'll hold that question then. And then we had a question about transplanting elderberry, Tranisa. I'll save that for the end so you can get through the PowerPoint here.
Okay, so all right, we're gonna try and speed through the pricking out process. I'll just demonstrate that a bit. So let's say you're using this type of setup. So you're using this because you're seeding a lot into one tray. because because you're going to ultimately pot them into a different pot. So these ones, they're going to go into our 6 flats. So if you're working with a plant like this, and for this example, we're working with something that's stretched. So you don't want to operate or handle these plants by their stem or the roots, because the root is super fragile and the stem is also fragile. But that cotyledon leaf, it has 2 of those. And so when I'm working with the plant, I'm gonna always try and hold it by its cotyledon leaf, and then just our pricking out process. Poke a hole inside of the soil, just go back and forth, and kind of, you want to push it down, not by the stem, because it's a little bit sturdy and it can break. So I'm going to push it down just a little bit at the root part inside of and just take it down. I'm moving both my hand and the stick down as I go inside the soil, so that I'm not pulling apart. So I'm not pulling them apart, pulling the plant against itself. So taking them both down at the same time inside of that soil. And then I'm pinching here so that when I pull out my stick, I don't like fling out the plant and other things, so that things just come out smoothly. But that's freaking out and potting up. Well, pricking out, so potting up is when you're like, saving the plant and then keeping that plant. Pricking out is something that you might need to do. Let's say for that germination buffer and you got like a type of tray. Let me see. Let's say you got a tray like this, which is a bit more permanent. So let's say you planted some beets inside of here, or some Swiss chard. For that germination rate, you planted maybe 5 at a time. Well, excuse me, a better example would be a pumpkin plant. So you planted maybe 3 pumpkin plants at a time, just to make sure that you have something in there. Now, when that pumpkin plant germinates and the seed sprouts, you're not gonna need all 3 of those. I typically like you can have 2 plants in there at once. But if you just need 1 plant, you're just gonna prick out one of those 2 plants, and you can just either snap it off at the stem to take out that plant without disturbing the roots. All right, moving on to the next part in the PowerPoint. All right, that's just a picture of Lola. I'm moving down to slide number 70.
I see a lot of folks are asking questions. Definitely, I think he's going to get through some of these questions, so I'm going to save them for the end. If he doesn't get to them, we'll revisit those questions, okay? So don't worry.
All right, so we're getting into the materials that you might want. So you're on slide number 70?
Yes.
All right, great. So here's just a list of them. Can you stay on that slide for me and then slowly move down? So here at Keep Growing Detroit, we start off with the potting mix. So we use Sunshine Grow potting mix, this right here. Inside of this potting mix, there's peat moss, Resilience, something that's trademarked, and then perlite, lime, and then also a wetting agent inside of here. So if you're trying to create your own potting up or soil media, and all of this potting mix and all of this, it's not soil, it's it's just those different components mixed together. So it's something that has a lot more life, if you will. And I'll talk about what soil mix we use here for our our media mix that we use here for our transplants too. But I'm going to explain those key components that you might use and why we use this inside of here. So peat moss. So peat moss is used because it can hold twice as much of its weight in water. 3 times as much weight of it in water, and then it also releases the moisture to the plant roots when it's needed. And this inside of here, this Resilience, The resilence, this is basically just silicone. And so silicone, it helps with the plant forming earlier flowers, and then it also helps with root growth. And this is just, I'm explaining what's inside of this sunshine mix for people. And then the dolomite lime, this lime is used to basically help raise the pH because the peat moss is acidic. And and then we also have perlite. So perlite, it's a natural material that comes from volcano ash. So perlite helps with aeration because, and it could do this because it's very resistant to compaction. So let's say your soil gets compacted, that perlite is going to stay in place, and it's also porous, so it has air pockets for roots to get air from, and then it also holds a bit of water, so it helps keeps the soil a bit moist. And one thing to also mention with perlite, it does help with locking in nutrients. So when you're watering your plants, the nutrients won't wash out. And then we have some fertilizers here. So inside of our mix, what our mix is, to be exact, and it's going to be on one of the slides for your reference to I'm on slide 9. But if you want to come down here, that's okay. So inside of our mix, we're using 2 of these 2.5 cubic mix of sunshine mix. On top of that, we're adding blood meal, rock phosphate, and green potash. So the blood meal is just high in nitrogen, and it's key for the formation of amino acids, chlorophyll, and then the rock potash. This is good for helping the plant bear fruits and also flower, and it's good for root growth too. And then the green potash, it's good for hardiness, so helping plants survive, and it's important for helping plants to make sugars and starches along with other needs. Now, and then we add 1 cup each of these to our media mix, and this is in the slides, so people will also have this through that. We add 1 cup of these to our mix, and then we also add 10 gallons of compost to our mix. We mix that up, and then we start using it for our trays. We do the same for these small trays, and then it's also the same for our bigger trays here. So like that's what we're using across the board. Yeah. So I'm just
Can you
trying
hold
to
up
get
that
through.
sunshine mix one more time? Somebody asked.
Yep.
So is that what you would recommend, just like a home grower, just some kind of potty mix from the store?
That's what I recommend. Things that you want to definitely check for if you're looking to be conscious about what you're buying. Just try to get something that's OMRI listed. So if you're looking to get organic products, if they don't have that organic signature on it, look for that OMRI listed thing. They are something that the government typically trusts. I believe they're out of Canada. And so they just certify different products that are organic.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions on here just about like small scale growing, like in an apartment. I am
Yeah.
an apartment. So just want to make sure you're going to get to that. Then there was one question about soil blocks, if you can mention that method as well. So
soil blocks, that method. Yeah, we got some soil block makers here. I can do that. So okay. Yeah, let's see, where are we at? So grow, I'm on slide number 7, and then I'm also going to demonstrate some methods for people to use at their house. So grow lights, slide number 10, excuse me. So when you're inside, if you want it, grow lights, these are things that are optional, but to help optimize your systems to avoid things like stretching, implementing grow lights is something that's important. What you want to make sure when you are purchasing grow lights or shop lights is that you have the right type of wavelength. So either a red wavelength or a blue wavelength. That's something that's good. And when you're setting this up, and hopefully you have some chains to kind of chain it up or to keep it above your plants, you want to make sure that it's at least 6 inches above your plants. So if your plants are here, just have it up a little bit for your plants to utilize that. And this is the, for those that want to pick up this or check out this model, thank you. That's something that you can use. And for heating your plants, to keep them at that temperature, just looking at a heat mat. So here they recommend, well, this particular variety, they have their recommended germ temperatures. I have my issues with some of these listed, so I gave you my recommendations. And then setting it up so that you have your insulation foam to capture that heat a bit better, right on top of your germ tray, and then you want to plug that up, have your things plugged up, and whatever type of tray you're using, whether it be this or, and kind of getting into that home garden setting. So you don't have to go out there and buy those different types of plastics and all of this. You can make use of the things that are inside of your house. Get creative with it. This just came from some type of thing that was shipped to my house. And the cardboard is porous, water gets through. And this is just like eggshell, an egg carton that you can use. So, you know, filling this up with soil, and if you are going to use just the base media mix, this right here, it's not totally necessary that you add in blood meal or rock phosphate or all those minerals. If you have like this media mix and then some compost, mix those things together, and then just have that be your mix. Just do like an even 50-50 mix of those two things. That should get you where you're going. You know, you don't want to, like, you know, break the bank for growing your plants. It's totally not necessary. But for this, you know, you're just gonna fill it up to the brim, and then it's nice because you can write on this with your plants. And for watering this, you're not gonna use something that's too harmful. Just a spray bottle to water your plants. And there's something in here.
Couple questions while you're doing that. So back up top, there was a question about, were the heating pads really necessary given that your house is heated?
Yeah. You know, yes. So totally the heating pads. So it all depends on, like, you know, I think you should definitely invest in a in some type of thermometer to help you know what temperature you're reaching, and you know how warm your plants are going to be. And if you have something like a radiator that you can, you know, set your plants close to or set them on top of, just make use of that. You know, get creative. You know, remember that seeds, they just need, you know, temperature, water, and sunlight. You know, all these things are optional in the end. Mm-hmm. So make it what you want it.
Yeah, and then how much do those heating mats run?
I'm not sure on this particular variety, but I would say somewhere between no more than 50. But there's so many different varieties of these that you can purchase. The ones that we actually use, this is one that's brought from our friend. Yeah, if you could get a picture of that. So this is where we place our plants when we're finished. We got a little setup of the insulating foam under. So there's like really thin ones that you can just roll out that don't really have to be of that quality of what I just showed you. And those keep the plants at a decent temperature for us, and we can germinate things easily. For this particular setup, we have some row cover in the back, and row cover or remay or agrobond. And this is something that we give out to community gardens, I believe. Is that right, T? To people. So I like to help lock in that temperature. We have some, let me see if I have any over here. We kind of broke down our setup just because it got a bit warmer. But imagine if we had these, and this I'm just showing off what we do here at the farm. So we would set these up to kind of elevate them and raise them while we have our plants under here. So like overnight, we would come in and just cover that up. And then that will be enough to help lock in that temperature to get our plants through the later season. But there's so many different types of heat mats out there, and there should be some affordable prices. I haven't personally looked into them.
Thanks for folks. Some people are throwing up links to things. Thank you for that. And then how long would you keep the plants on the mat?
How long would I keep plants on the mat? So, so they can definitely be, you just want to germinate them. So after they're done germinating, so like these ones, they don't have to be on the mat. It's all a matter of like what's the size of that plant, and if it has finished germinating. So if you see like a full lush of plants, you can take it off that germ mat, and they can pretty much take care of themselves as long as they have water, sunlight. But I'm not keeping these on here longer than 3 weeks. Yeah.
Okay.
And especially if your plant is starting to dry out. Oh, here's a great picture of some stretching right here. But you can kind of see that the sunlight was over here, so all of them are pointing towards that direction, trying to get some sun. Yeah.
And then just like, I'll just say for my little windowsill, a couple people were asking like, again, about the windowsill gardens or the, or just like a container, an apartment or something like that. If folks can't make that investment of the heating pad, the plants will still germinate, right? It just, maybe they won't germinate as fast, that kind of thing. Can you speak to that? Like if folks aren't ready to make that investment?
Yeah, totally fine. So if you're not ready to make that investment, just keep your plants close to wherever your heat's coming out, or where if you have a radiator, just keep them close to that. Make sure that they're not drying out too fast, and just pay attention to them. Your plants will germinate if they're not heating that ideal temperature. Just as long as they're not like below 50 or like close to 60, they'll still germinate. It just won't be at that quick pace. And yeah, so it can get as complicated as you want it to be, or it can be as bare bones as you want it to be. Just remember that your seeds, they just need water, temperature, and some sunlight. Okay.
Yeah. And are you suggesting, there was a question up top, a little further up about like putting the plastic around them while they're growing? Somebody was asking about that.
Now that's
is that
if you want
necessary,
to.
or?
That's not necessary, but if you want to speed them up, you just have to be conscious of how much water gets captured in there. It's not totally necessary, but if you if you really need your plants to germinate really fast, you want to lock in that moisture so that it's not just going anywhere. But totally not necessary. It's something that we've used to get that quicker germination, but not necessary. I was just showing you the setup that we used over here. So like, let's say like out here, even inside of the greenhouse, plants, they're still feeling that low temperature. So we just left them uncovered. They're still going to be exposed to that and probably face some type of freezing or something along that line. So over the night, we just cover it up so that they have that extra layer of protection and to help lock in that heat some. And then once the sun comes out and once it's morning, we just pull that off.
Yeah, there's a question about, again, here's a question about what I can start now from, but so we're gonna send, Kelly's gonna send his week by week what he's planting. We'll send that out to the participants for that. So that was from Miss Andrews.
But Miss Andrews, you can definitely start your brassicas, tomatoes, peppers. You can still do those things. Collards, kale. You can start all of those things. Um, T, if you could share out our plan your garden, the one that just has the list of plants that we have.
Yeah, I'll get that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like all of those plants, besides the ones that we're starting in the fall, like those plants can like still be started around this time of the year. All right, let's see where we are. We still have a lot to get through, but yeah. Egg cartons are something that I like. You can also use Tupperware, but one thing that I recommend with Tupperware, you just have to make sure that there's holes in the bottom or holes in the side. So here's an example. So let's say if you have like a bigger container, like this right here, and let's say this is just a pot for like a tomato plant or something, and you might move it outside, and let's say you got to go someplace for a week and you water your plants. I recommend that if you have some type of container like this, just go down maybe like 25% and just drill a hole like here and also on the other side. What this is going to help you do, it's going to be like a catch. So water will still be down here. So while you're away, your plant will still have access to water. Like if you put your hole like down here at the bottom, then all of that water will have a place to escape. So if you're about to go for a trip and set your plants up in a way that they have a little bit of a storage of water to use for themselves. So your hole would be like right here, or if you're doing something like right here inside of your tray, just do a hole on the side. And yeah, that's one tip that I wanted to share with you all. Let's continue down the PowerPoint. All right, so on this PowerPoint, I listed the materials that you might want. 5-part sunshine mix, and 1 part shifted compost.
What slide are you
I am on slide 11. So I might also demonstrate some watering. All right, so T, I'm moving down to slide 11. Okay. T, can you hear me?
Yep, we're there.
Okay. All right, so again, for our media mix, what we're using here, we're using 2 bags of the 2.5 sunshine mix, 10 gallons of compost, 1 cup of the 1 cup of our fertilizers. And for this, with with minerals amendments, there's so many amendments out there that have an impact on like what plants do. So typically you might see highlighted on things like your N, your P, and your K, your nitrogen, potassium, your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But there's so many other minerals out there that plants need. So like calcium, plants need it for the formation of cell walls. They need magnesium, they need silicone. Plants also need sulfur. So when you're playing around with like creating your own media mix, take a look at each of those minerals and see what are those natural ways that they exist inside of nature. Like plants need boron, for example, to also help create cell walls. So there's so many other minerals out there. It's not just nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. These are good starting points for your media mix, and they're also not necessary. Again, if you just want to be straightforward, I recommend just some potting mix and then some compost. Mix that together 50-50, and that will get you where you need to go until you need to plant your plants in your field. And so fertilizers that we use here on the farm, one thing that we've been using in the past is fish emulsion. This is a really old container. It's also a process that I'm slowly phasing out for something that I like a bit more. I'm using worm castings in a liquid form. So the worm castings was just taken and then put into some water, and we just brewed up a tea from it. And this is what it looks like. And so I'm spraying this now on top of my plants. And there's some different management things that are important for these. So I'm only spraying like every 3 days, not every day. And if you're using something like fish emulsion, when you spray, during the time of day when you spray is going to be important. So if the sun is out and you spray your plants with fish emulsion or something that's really thick, you run the risk of burning your plants. So if you're going to use something like fish emulsion, you only want to do that when it's overcast or when the sun's going down. And also your plants are going to smell like fish. So yeah, but with worm castings, I like it better because it's from worms, and you can also, the worms, you know, they're okay. You're just taking their castings from them and making a product out of them. With the fish, that's the whole fish. The fish is dead. But, and so with the worm casting sprays, it has a couple of uses. Along with just adding some nutrients to the plants, it also acts as an insecticide. So it's really good at deterring pests like aphids. And then I can also spray this any time of the day. So when the sun's out, when it's not out, that's totally fine. And pardon me? Yep. So you just want to look up fish emulsion. That's totally fine. Another free fertilizer out there, and this is just a tip. One thing that you can also do, so let's say, you know, you got a very nice, if you're close to a forest or if you have a tree in your neighborhood that looks very pretty, it just talks to you. You can see it, it's beautiful. Or I guess during this time of the year, if you remember that tree looking very good, you're gonna go to that tree, you're gonna take some of that soil that's beneath that tree. Or if you're in a forest, you're just gonna take some of that soil from the forest and then you're gonna put it in the bucket, and then you're gonna add some water to that bucket and then close it up, and you're gonna mix it around, let it sit for a day, and then you're gonna take that water and use that to fertilize the plants. So what you've basically done by doing that, you've inoculated your plants with those same minerals that luscious tree or that beautiful forest was using onto your plants. So that's a free type of fertilizer that you can use for your plants. And you also get to go out to the forest and check out your tree that's in your neighborhood. And so, yeah, that's fertilizing. Okay, so are there any questions about, let's see, potting up some stuff here. What I wanted to do for people before I get into taking care of your plants.
What slide are you on?
I'm starting to move towards slide number 12. So I have our tomato plants. They've been in here for a bit. I'm going to show you all how to seed up those. And I'm also going to demonstrate some of the watering that we use here at the farm. So just gotta clear some space.
So it looks like folks who are on their phones can't see the slideshow at the same time as the thing. So I'm kind of toggling back and forth between the slideshow and Akello's feed here. So sorry for the back and forth, but that's the reason why.
All right, we don't need to pay attention to the slide right now, so we can be all screen, if that helps. I'll let you know what to be on or what's important to be on. So I'm gonna turn on our water. This right here is a faucet nozzle. This is what we use in production settings just to get a nice mist on top of our plants, something that doesn't dislodge the plants or the soil too much. If you're in a home setting, a water bottle or a spray bottle will do just fine. So what the water looks like when it comes out, just nice and soft. And then I'm just gonna come here. So this strip tray right here is not gonna be the final home for the plants. So once I'm done watering them, I'm gonna compact it some so that my seeds have a nice place to sit on top of. And I'll just do one in front of us right now because we don't want to take too much time. And we're almost through with our slides at the same time. This is a faucet nozzle. I'll let you get a close up. All right. No, so. And when you go to buy this, make sure that you get the setting that's, I'm forgetting the name of it, but I can also share this in the link, the exact setting that we use for this one. All right, so once I have these flats like this, I'm gonna just come through and can compact the soil some. I would not do this if this was the final home for my plants. Like I want to come through and try to compact this soil. That would just not be great. Not a good practice. And I'm gonna do the Cherokee purple. You wanna make sure that you're always labeling. And then I'm also gonna demonstrate the larger water hose that we use for our larger plants. It's something that I recommend people get for their backyard gardens as well. Now, all right, all right, so I got my Cherokee purple. When you have them in here, you're also gonna need a, what is it called? A strainer, thank you. You're gonna need a strainer to catch the seeds. So I like to twirl them around, make sure that they're not settled when I do this. And then I'm just gonna dump it in there. And that's all my seeds, well, most of them. And yeah, this is weird with gloves on. And then I'm just gonna space them out. Doesn't have to be perfect, just get them on the tray. I'm gonna come back later and spread them out by hand. And this is just 1,000 seeds right now. I'm actually gonna use this. And this is the method that I'm using right now. I'm just gonna spread out the seeds over that entire tray.
Where you guys
I can
purchase
check.
the sunshine mix, Kello? A couple people asked that.
Yep, so you can find the sunshine mix at Home Depot or your local greenhouse store or your local farming store, but we get these in bulk. So we're ordering like pallets of 45 at a time. We purchase them from BFG. I don't know what BFG stands for. I don't know what the company knows, but yeah. That's the big company that we're getting these from. So seeds are spread out. It's okay if they're on top of each other, just like these. Eventually, we're gonna move them to a different place. The finished one will look something like that. And then I'm gonna take some soil. So For seeding depth, you never want to cover it with more than twice its width. So I'm just going to sprinkle just a little bit of soil on top. And then I'm going to water these in one more time. And if some seeds got dislodged, I'll just cover those back up again. And that's a finished tray. Make sure that it's labeled just in case. If you do run into the thing where you forgot the labeling of your plants, or you mixed up 2 tomatoes, sometimes it might not be a problem because they're just going in your garden. But for me, for example, if I mix up 2 tomato plants and they're going out to somebody else who doesn't know what they are, there are subtle differences that you can see when the plants are at their smaller stage. You can visibly tell the difference from a jalapeno from a habanero pepper. You can tell the difference from a sun goat tomato from a black cherry tomato. So there are differences in the plants, and there's also differences in the seeds too. If we could see these. So these are there's keys and clues that we can use to identify these plants so that they don't get mixed up. Getting mixed up with plants, it happens a lot if you're playing around with a lot of plants like I am. But just learning the different clues from your plants will help. And then if you have something like the cotyledon leaves, so the cotyledon leaves of a celery plants look like this, and then the cotyledons of a bok choy look like heart shapes. So,
I don't think you told folks what cotyledons were.
Cotyledons are the starter leaves of a plant.
Thanks.
Yep. So they're the first leaves of a plant before they get their true leaves. And then their true leaves will look like the typical tomato plant or pepper plant or whatever plant that you're used to seeing.
And we had a question way far back about how do you know when it's time to transfer them outdoors?
Yep, so that's going to be like our last slide, and we are working our way there.
Okay.
Yep, so sorry that it's a lot to talk about with transplanting. So managing the care of your transplants. So I'm on slide number 12 now, T. And we can stay on the slide for a bit if you want to hold that up for people. So when you have your plants and they're just out there, they're on your germ tray and they've germinated and they're in their pot, they're where they're going to be until you're going to plant them out in your field. The most important thing that you can do is to manage their water correctly. How plants die, they don't typically die because they're drying out or that they got too cold. They're typically dying because they just had too much water. And when a plant has too much water, a number of things start to pop up. So you get diseases like damping off, which is the major reason why the major type of disease your plant will see, or the major type of disease you will have when you're potting up your plants or germinating plants. And you'll also get, your plant will also start to suffocate because the roots can't breathe. And then you'll also start to see algae start to bloom on the top of your soil. And I believe we have some examples of that. So let's take a look at that. So you'll start to see algae start to form on your plants. And then you'll also start to see some crusting You'll also see some algae nets start to populate around this plant, and the algae nets, they eat the algae, and then they also suck the sap from your plants. So of the things that you can do to your plants, overwatering them is the worst thing. And so what you need to do is recognize the type of waterer you are. And so there's there's a couple types of waterers, but the main ones out there are people that underwater and then people that overwater. And try to get into the underwatering part, because if you underwater, you can always go back and water it again. But if you overwater your plant, you have to wait, and there's nothing you can really do to get that water out, and you're going to get issues like algae and diseases start to form. So this might be a good time to demonstrate watering these plants. So what we use here, this is a drum hose. It's spelled DRAMM, and this is the 1000. So what the water looks like, it's super light. When it comes out, it's not heavy. And when you're watering your plants, you want the water to be just nice and light on it. You want to try to simulate rain as much as possible. And see, I'm on the, if you could switch off to the slide, if you're on it, into the in person. What you saw just there was a little bit of burping that was happening. So if you are watering your plants, you want to let your hose run for a little bit before that water to come out. Because if that water starts to happen here while I'm watering the plants, they're going to get a bit more water than they need, and dislodging might happen. So I'm going to demonstrate watering just on a couple of these because they don't need watering per se, but just for demonstration's sake, so I'll do it. So when you're watering, you always want to start your hose not directly on your plant. You want to start it on the side of it, let it run for a little bit, and you want to try and water as evenly as possible. And when you're watering, you want to recognize the things that are going to dry out first. So on this table right here, things that are in the center, they're typically not going to dry out. And this is because there's less airflow in the center. And but there's more airflow on the corner, on the edges of it. So these plants on the corner are going to dry out a lot faster than the ones on the inside. So I'm just going to treat them a little bit differently when I'm watering. And you also might want to pay attention to that plant's not drying out on the inside, because if things stay wet for too long, then you start to get that algae and disease pressure start to build.
If you already have algae on your plants, is there anything that can be done about that?
So yeah, there's something that can be done about it. If you have algae on your plants, the bad thing about algae is that it starts to crust up, and it also starts to suffocate the roots almost. But it starts on the top layer of the soil. So just come through and just scoop off that layer, and then just add some new soil on top of it. It'll be fine. And then from there, just make sure that you're watering less than you need to from there moving. Well, not less than you need to, less than you were when you were watering your plant. So, just come through, just pick off the soil, and then just replace it with some new soil. And typically it's not a huge problem, but things that it leads to, like the presence of algae isn't bad, but if it starts to really build and starts to get crusty and starts to attract pest, then that's bad. So like early stages of algae like this isn't a problem because we're not seeing anything, but then as things build on, we will need to address it. But from like a smaller scale, if you just got this one flat, just go ahead and take care of it. If we see algae on like multiple flats, then we'll take care of it. So we want to, in a production setting, we can't really treat these as individuals per se. We have to make sure that we're like addressing things all at once so that we're using our time strategically. And so let's do some watering here. So I'm just going to try and water this first flat right here. We'll imagine that This is just one flat and there are no other flats beside it. So you can be fancy with it if you want by flipping it over, but with how soft this water is, you don't really need to. It already simulates rainfall. So I'm just gonna give the edges a little bit more.
Okay, well, there was a question here about
Yep.
from Tish. She's planning on growing some perennial herbs. She wants to do it from seed. Should she
Yeah.
start those indoors first? What kind of advice? I know you do a lot of perennials. What kind of advice would you give her?
Yeah, she should start those indoors. She should start those as soon as possible. If I were to water this entire table, yeah, I would be going like this, moving, make sure that when I'm off of it, I'm going all the way past it so that I'm giving an even amount of water, and then going past it again, and then going past it as I move down. All right, that's watering. Are there any other questions while I'm switching, T?
I think we're getting through them.
Okay. So, yeah. And then I kind of mentioned this earlier back about the greenhouse, how you really manage the growth of your greenhouse.
I'm sorry, there was one
Yeah.
question. Does it matter if we leave them in the germination trays until they have their first true leaves? That's when you should prick them out, right? Can you speak on that?
Well, depends on your setup. So if you have them in like these type of trays where you know that you're gonna have to pot them up, you can wait till they have their true leaves, as long as they don't have that competition. If they just have enough space for themselves and they're not right on top of another plant, then you can leave them in there for a little bit longer and you don't see any stretching like this. Like if you see any stretching like this, like these plants are begging me right now to pot them up. They can chill inside of there. Yeah, and then also, yeah, you just want to make sure that the plant will tell you if it needs more space or needs more nutrients or needs more sunlight. These are signs that the plants will have. It's like a sign for drying out. You'll see that the soil is it looks a little bit lighter. The tray is lighter. You always want to check the weight of the tray because sight can sometimes be deceiving. And you want to look at the plant. Is it kind of shriveling up? So when a plant condenses, that's its way of saving water. So like a plant, it'll be like this, but you'll start to see it kind of retract some. That's its way of lessening its use of water. And yeah. What is another sign? Yeah, and then stretching, a sign of lack of sunlight. But so managing temperature is how you're going to get that ideal growth, and that's how you affect the growth rate. So let's say, for example, we're just out here and it's like the dead of winter. Plants aren't growing. Like there's sunlight, there's water, but they're not growing because there's no temperature for them to grow at. So I noticed that, and so I put that importance of like managing temperature with my plants. So making sure that they have that ideal temperature of growth. Inside of this greenhouse, I like to keep it above 45, 50 degrees and no more than 80 degrees. So when you're growing your plants inside of your home setting, make sure that you have a similar regulation on temperature as much as possible, because if you're giving your plant too much temperature, let's say you're keeping you're keeping its area at 70 degrees overnight, and you have your plant date of like May or April, by the time you get to that plant date, your plant will be so stressed because it was just growing. And so if a plant just grows too much, before it's time for it to be planted out, you're going to have issues of like, over rooting or a lack of nutrients inside of that plant. So you really want to manage that growth rate by controlling the temperature. And that's my major advice on that one. And then also signs of frost damage. So the leaf will look like it's let me see. I have that up. One moment, sorry. Yeah, the leaf will look like it's shriveled, but also the color will change of it. The color will change on it, and if you could go outside and look at some of the plants during this time of the year, or plants that were left over that had to survive the winter. But let's say you have your kale plant that you left inside the field over the winter. If you go out there and look at that plant, that would be a clear sign of frost damage. And so with transplants that are like your hot crops, your tomatoes, your peppers, they're susceptible to frost damage more than those ones like the brassicas, the collards, and the kales, because they just don't have that ability to move sugars like those other cold crops. So making sure that you're keeping that temperature above 45, that's what I recommend. That's what I've seen that works for plants. And by keeping that temperature regulated like that, you're really gonna reach that perfect height and ideal height and sturdiness of your plants. And we'll talk about ideal heights and such when we get to the when to plant your plants slide. Aeration. Aeration is important for management because if it's just still and there's no airflow, it means that diseases kind of have a bit more free range when it comes to like developing. And so that airflow helps kills diseases or keeps them suppressed. And so let's say you're just watering like you water and you overwater. If there's no airflow to help kind of keep that in check, then those algae, then those things are gonna bloom because it's just settled and they're not being disturbed. So by having things like a fan kind of set up in the back, or like an open window or something along that lines to help just not let that air stay still, you're gonna help with keeping things like disease pressure down. And I'm moving down to slide 13. So we're still on managing them. So diseases and dampening off. Diseases and all these things are gonna happen. You're gonna get disease pressure and dampening off because mainly a mismanagement of water. So if you get your water management, get that ideal for your plants, then you're really not gonna have any issues with disease pressure. And of course, you wanna start off with disease-free seed and also disease-free media if you can. These diseases are kind of present, and then it's also, and one more thing you want to start off with. You want to start with a nutrient-dense media mix. So, these plants, they have their immune systems and whatnot, but it doesn't really work if they don't have the tools that those minerals provide to really fight off those diseases. So it's not the presence of the disease that's a danger. It's the lack of nutrients that puts the plants in peril when it comes to managing diseases. And that's one of the reasons why it's not recommended that you start off with just using your own soil from your backyard, because there could be a presence of disease that your plants at that stage can't deal with and that they're not used to yet. And when you're starting off with that media mix, or when you're starting off with compost, and compost should be okay because it's something that's been turned and it's something that should be disease-free, something that the company should be guaranteeing because they're reaching that high temperatures to kill disease spores and such. So adding compost to your media mix is okay because of that. And one more thing that you have to worry about if you're going to use soil from your backyard, the soil from your backyard might have weed seeds in them. So let's say we're going to germinate our brassica seeds, but we have different cotyledon leaves or different starter leaves popping up and mixing with our plants. That's just something that you'll have to account for if you're going to use your own soil from your backyard.
Mhm. If they're just using a soilless mix without the compost, is that going to be okay?
The only thing about that, so there's not much nutrients in just if you're, let's say for example, you're using the media mix back there, there's not going to be much nutrients to hold it over. Off. Okay, gotcha. Sorry about that. There's not going to be enough nutrients to really hold your plants over. And for like time-wise, some of these plants need to be inside of their trays for a month at least before it's time for them to really go out into nature. So if you're just using like the baseline perlite and peat moss mix, there's not a lot of nutrients in there for it to hold over. So like if you're gonna do that, I recommend that you try to fertilize your plants with some other type of supplemental fertilizers like fish emulsion, worm castings, or blood meal for your plants. So that's the only risk. If your plants aren't staying in there for a long time, go for it. But yeah, any other questions around that?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah. So, is there a question, T?
How do we interpret our garden soil sample data with mixing the dirt for our planting?
Well, that's a long answer. So I'm assuming that this person has a soil test on hand.
Yeah, Tish, we can definitely sidebar about that if you'd like to, so we can actually look at your results and see. So maybe me and you can sidebar. But Akela, just so you're aware of the time, we're at 5 to 3.
Yes. Now. So yeah, and there's one more slide after this. So we are almost there. we are almost there. But to answer Trish's question, if she's already planting inside of her backyard soil and she has a soil test from there and was given the get-go for that, then just go ahead and incorporate your soil inside of your media mix. And if you want to like take that a step further, if you already have your soil test, just go ahead and research what those different minerals do for your plants, and then that will be the first steps, my first recommendations. But so for pest pressure and things of that nature, so for aphids, it's pretty much just checking your plants daily, looking at in between. You want to like, the aphids will usually settle like right in between where this starter leaf is popping up. So the aphids will typically settle like right in between there. You want to get down and close into your plants to make sure that you can see them, and they're drinking the sap, so they're going to be green just like your plants. And typically an easy way to manage those, especially if you're on a smaller scale, with just a couple of plants, just come through and prick them off by hand. And the fungus gnats, for those, it's all about the environment for them. So if they have that algae food, the algae that we just showed you, getting rid of that algae, making sure that you're not overwatering, then the gnats will just naturally start to find something else. And spider mites, it's hard to get rid of those by hand picking and taking away their natural environment, but they typically like cucurbits. So, but one thing that spider mites don't like, they don't like to be outside. They don't like rain. So you can either spray them with the spray bottle every now and then with some neem oil mixed in with it, Or you can just take your plant outside when it's about to rain and let it just chill out there for a bit, and those spider mites will get a taste of that. You typically see spider mites inside of greenhouses or places that don't have rain or rain flow. But if you're like inside a greenhouse, the spider mites will find your cucurbits. Trust me, they will. So key things to managing diseases and pest pressures. You want to start off with disease-free media and disease-free seeds and a mineral-rich soil so that your plants have the right immune system to tackle those things. Good water management and good airflow. All right, so we're getting down to our last slide. So when to plant plants outside. I'm just gonna pull up one of these. There we go. So these plants right here, they have a couple of their cotyledon leaves, and in terms of like ratio, so let's say like this right here, this is 1, and then this plant is almost at 2. So when a plant is in maybe 3 or 2 of size of its root ball, of its root mass, and that's when I'm planting it out. And these plants, they're about 2 weeks away from when they're gonna be ready to be planted off. You want to look for signs of just how many true leaves are out there. So it still has its cotyledon leaves. And this is a sign of a healthy plant. So the longer that those cotyledon leaves stay on that plant and that they're green, the healthier the plant. When the plant is unhealthy, let me go grab one of those real quick, just to show. So when a plant is unhealthy, the cotyledon leaf, and this right here is a brassica, and these are some curlicles right here. When a plant is unhealthy, like this one right here, they're super stressed. They're right on top of each other. The cotyledon leaves are going to turn yellow. So when you're doing your transplant production, just a way for you to know if your plant is healthy or not, just take a look at those cotyledon leaves, see how long they stay on there. The plant will naturally shed those cotyledon leaves off, but the longer that they have them, the better your plant is doing. But typically, if you've aligned your plant to be planted at a certain time and you started those seeds way back then on that recommended date, then plant your plants out there on that set date. And if they're in that ratio, if they have more than three true leaves, that's a good time to plant them. Some other conditions that you need to be aware of, though. So plants, when you plant them outside, and well, you're introducing them into a new environment. And so right here, it's like perfect inside of this greenhouse or inside of your house. They're used to that. They're not really prepared for Detroit weather out there or crazy Michigan weathers. So you have to slowly introduce them to the elements. And so to properly do that, this is called the hardening off process. You just want to take your plants outside during the day for 7 days or a week, or 7 to 10 days before you go out and plant them inside of their final spot. So you just want to every day go out, when the sun goes down, take them back in, or if you really want to be OG about it, just take them and put them outside and let them just chill, going through and water them and whatnot. But you want to do that before you plant your plants outside. And if you don't, what will happen? The plant will be in shock. So you'll go out there, you'll go out there and look at your plant like, it's been a week. What happened to my plant? It hasn't like changed or anything. The plant is experiencing shock because it's taking time to get used to the elements. And so it's basically almost like frozen in place. So you won't see any like new growth happen within that shock period. Most of the times plants can make it through that period, but it does affect your harvest dates or your expected harvest dates. It would take a little bit longer for that plant to produce the crop that you wanted to produce. And so by simply just, taking out that week before you have your plant week, slowly introduce them to the elements. And one extra thing that I like to do to kind of help them fight that shock, you want to fertilize them. So let's say you did your week of hardening off, it's time to plant them, you plant them in the ground. You want to fertilize them with whatever nutrients you're using, and then that's going to help give them that extra energy to really hit the ground running. So planting your plants when they're within 2 to 3 of that ratio of that root ball that you have them at, and you want to make sure that they have 3 or more cotyledon leaves, a nice thick stem, and then you want to do that hardening off period, and then fertilize them, water them in after you planted them. Yeah. Any questions about that?
Wonderful, very thorough, folks are saying.
I forgot one more thing. The outside conditions are key. Sorry about that. So right now it's like the raining season. It's starting to get there. We just had I think that was like our first thunderstorm of the year, right? Very nice. So I would not plant these plants outside if I had to plant them right outside because it's too wet. And so you kind of want to line it up with nature. So let's say our planting week was this week. I might put that planting week on hold because it's just too wet for the plants to go outside right now. You want them to be, you don't want it to be super wet. You just want it to be nice and moist. So probably like a week after, just using this date as an example, I will plant these like the week after, and that's okay because they could still grow out some. They're still in the tray. I might still be fertilizing them too, but the plants will be fine. And they're actually going to do better because they're not going to plant them out in that muck. So you just want to make sure that it's it's nice and moist out, not too wet. And if you do it perfectly, let's say you plant your plants out there, and the next 2 days there might be a thunderstorm or a rainstorm. That's perfect. You want nature to water your plants for you. But when you plant your plants, make sure you water them in, of course. But that real watering is going to happen in those next 2 days. And so that's how you kind of want to try and line it up as much as possible. All right.
Yes. Akello, if you're okay, I'm just going to open it up to any final questions as we close out.
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Yeah. Catherine says, how often do you fertilize? I think you mentioned every 3 days or something like that.
Every 3 days with the fish emulsion. And if you're going to use something like the worm casting is something that I'm using every 3 days. If you're using something like fish emulsion, you're going to use that every 3 days, but only when it's shaded out or the sun is going down because of burning. With blood meal, if you want to do something like that, you just take some and just sprinkle it right in, and then maybe water it in to make sure that it gets down to the roots. I would do that probably once a month because it's just so much stuff that the plants are working with. Yep. And that's just adding in some extra nitrogen.
Lots of comments, great information, good webinar. Thanks, guys. There's some people that called in. If you called in, I'm not sure if you can actually type your questions into the chat. So if you called in, if you raise your hand, I can allow you to talk directly to Akello and ask your question. Cool. Question here. Can you talk about which plants do and do not do well as transplanted? That was a good question.
Yes.
Which ones need to be direct seeded? Which ones should be transplanted?
Right. So there is no should know or there is no this plant needs that. These are all things that are optional that we're doing, right? But what's recommended, and mostly because they're a hassle, that's why we don't do it. Things like carrots, things like sprouts, excuse me, like bean seeds, things like of those natures, things that need to be planted in like high quantities. We don't transplant, and also things that are we don't transplant. So there's a list of that that I can send out. That should have been included. But typically things like carrots, turnips, things that we just naturally, that things that are listed within our transplant list, our seed list, are things that we don't transplant. Tia, I think we have that. But things that we could definitely transplant. Garden. Let me get the exact list for my friend. Like things like lettuce mix, Swiss chard. There's some optional things in there too, like spinach. You can transplant those, or you can direct seed them. So, and you can direct seed everything. Okay. There are some optional transplants.
If you're
I'll
not
give you one.
familiar with that term, direct seed, that's just directly
Like,
putting it right in your garden bed,
right,
as
like this
opposed
is
to starting
me.
transplants.
Yeah. So like this is me just taking this tomato plant, putting it right out there into the soil. Radishes, chamomile, dill, like things that we just naturally list on our plan your garden sheet. These are things that we recommend for direct seeding or transplanting. Oh, and there's also like, so there is like a lettuce mix that's for cutting that we have on our list. And then there's like head lettuce. So like if you have like a head lettuce, you could definitely transplant that. Or if you're like growing lettuce for like a salad, I guess both of those are eaten in a salad form, but in like high densities, like you would direct sow those or plant them directly into the ground. Arugula is another thing that will be planted directly into the ground. Yeah. And also, there are those things that just don't like to be disturbed. Like their roots don't like to be disturbed. So like carrots don't like to have their roots disturbed. And there's also something that's commonly transplanted, like cucurbits. So you normally see cucurbits planted directly into the ground, like your squash, your cucumbers, watermelon. Those things can be directly planted into the ground, but we've started to do those as transplants or return them as transplants for those that have been around in the program. And we're direct seeding those into those pots and then giving them out to people. And and we're doing that because we just understand like how fragile they are. Typically, like our plants are going from like tomato plants into here, into there with our melon seeds or our cucumber seeds. We're just putting them directly into this tray and then letting them stay there until we give them out for people to plant. All right. Any other questions?
Everybody, a lot of people are just saying thanks for offering the class, and thanks to the camera lady, Miss Danielle.
They say thank you, Danielle.
I will, Zoom should send you a copy of the webinar. If you don't get it, send me an email. We're still playing with technology and making sure that everybody gets it. If you don't get it, we'll also send out, Akilo said he'll send out the week
Those
by
dates.
week calendar.
Yep.
Somebody asked for the fertilizer types, so we can maybe take a picture of those and send those in an email. And what I'll do is I'll just drop the link to the recording in that email. So if for some reason you don't get it, let us know.
Yeah, and the fertilizer types are also in the PowerPoint.
Yep. Okay, good. Okay, if there's no final questions, I'll wait a second for final questions while he's seating. A lot of folks are saying thank you, thank you, thank you, Akello. You did a great job. Folks said they feel more confident. I have a final poll for you, if you're still around, an ending poll. If you could just let us know how you're feeling about seating now. A couple people are starting to tell us, after this KGD webinar, I am much more confident in starting seeds indoors. Thank you. B, I still need help. If you still need help, maybe we can reach out to you and talk one-on-one. or
Yeah.
you can ask questions. You can
Yeah.
send questions to either
Um,
Akello at keepgrowingdetroit.org, right directly to his email. I can drop that in the chat.
mhm. And you could probably have your label up here, just draw a diagram of that so that you know what's what. Yeah. And with this, I'm gonna fill the soil up to the brim, just because naturally as water just hits the soil, it's gonna naturally fall down some. And this one, I would probably fill it up the entire way. Same with this one here. Yeah. I'm just throwing out some extra stuff. And yeah.
93% said they are much more confident. So thanks, Kello.
Oh wow. What were you gonna say if we were like 0%? Like, oh no.
But horrible job. Any tips on homemade compost?
Homemade compost. So yeah, you just want to be mindful of the capacity your home has. I'm just putting it together on the side of my head real quick. So for home composting, just remember that certain things take longer to break down. Like all organic materials can be composted. So that includes meats, lemons, eggshells, all of those things. But they take different time frames to completely break down. So that's why it's typically not recommended that you do meats, because just in home garden setting doesn't really have the capacity. Sorry, I was like thinking that way. Doesn't really have the capacity to break down those dense bones and all those meats. And you also get that smell too when things aren't breaking down correctly. So with compost, my frame of thought for compost is that this is how you have to think about it. It's a habitat for the microbes. So the microbes are the things that are actually doing the work here. So what you're doing, you're feeding the microbes so that they can live within a habitat, if you will. So what microbes eat, they eat our food, but they also need sunlight, water, and airflow. So when you're building your compost pile, you want to make sure that you have those things. And when you're adding your food, make sure that you're giving them diverse food options. So not just the same thing every week. They're just like us. When they have diversity in what they eat, they're a lot more resilient in that. And let's see. When you're building out your pile, when you're starting off your pile, take some soil from your backyard and just add that to it. So that's going to inoculate your starting pile with some microbes to start off with.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got your food, you're adding that to it, but you also want to add in some browns, some nutrients, so things like if you're gonna add wood chips, just add just a couple of wood chips. Don't drown it out, because it takes time for those things to dry out and they tie up nutrients, or they tie up nitrogen. So you want to add things that are light, so like leaves, grass clippings, and cardboard, paper, all these things to be composted. And so you want to make sure that you have a nice mix. So if you're mixing, we talked about ratios. So like, with the transplants, 1 part, 2 parts. It's the same thing with compost. So you want to have at least, and you really need a lot of, carbon to really get your compost cooking. So at least 20 parts, 1 part carbon, okay? So for like every 20 carbon that you have, that's 1 part. And what does that actually look like? So let's say if I got like a bucket, and this is just to make sure that it's cooking. So like not everybody can really reach this capacity. So make it what you use. make it what you can. So if you got a bucket of, say, all this food right here that you stored up, you want to try at least add like 10 buckets or at least 5 buckets of some type of brown. And so you have to get creative with where you find those browns. But on the other hand, one thing that I try to recommend is that your compost pile reflects your environment. So of course you're bringing in other things from just from what you eat from your diet, but you want to try to keep your compost pile looking like the stuff that's coming out your neighborhood or just somewhere that's like close within your vicinity. Don't try and go out there to somewhere super far away and bring out something and add that to your compost pile just to do it. Just try to make sure that it resembles things that are coming out your garden, coming out your kitchen.
Yeah, a
Keep it as
couple
local
people,
as possible.
couple people said they're struggling with that compost thing.
Yeah.
One question about those egg cartons. When you transplant in the egg cartons, do you break the cartons
Yeah, you just
and
cut it up.
direct plant, or
Um,
are you removing them from the carton carefully?
mm.
Like, do you go ahead and put those straight in the ground? I guess depending on the
So,
material, huh?
so when your plant grows out, those roots, they're gonna fill out the entire part of that plant. And this isn't a lot of media space, so your plants will peak a lot earlier than a plant that has more soil access. So when you come through, you should be able to cut these out, and the roots of that plant should help that soil stay in place. So you can be working on just one cell while the other ones stay in place while you cut it. And to really help this plant really transplant well, if you're gonna put this directly in the ground, I recommend just cutting out this bottom part or kind of just cutting this, making it a little bit easier for those roots to start to spread out, because it would take some while for this stuff to naturally biodegrade. And it's good for the plant. It's not a problem for the plant, but it will kind of hold back the root growth for a bit. So like if you pull this out, and if this part was just open, the root growth will look like this. It won't really like spread out if it had its normal access. So break up the this part a little bit. The root ball should be intact when you come out and take out your plant, depending on the size of it. But yeah.
Yeah. So we're at the after party, you guys.
We're at the
Main
after
event
party.
is over if you want to log off, but just want to get through a couple of questions that people still had, and if you have questions, go ahead and throw them up. We'll stick around for the last couple questions here. Let's see. There was a question about, here it is. If I put a mulching bag on my lawnmower, do the clippings count as brown? There are not chemical treatments on my yard. I worry because it is very weedy and viney. Does that matter? So using the clippings from a lawnmower, A, is that a brown or not? And B,
That is a brown. That is a
okay.
brown.
And then B, should she be worried about those weeds in that?
You know, the why, well, I guess I would need to ask her a follow-up question about that, but typically, no. If you know that you're not, depending on when you're like going to lawn mow, like if that weed has gone to flower, then that's when you have then that's when you have to worry about weed seeds. But if you're like going through and mowing on a consistent basis where that weed plant doesn't really have time to go through and flower, then you should be okay. But if it's been like a while and that weed plant has started to do its stuff and the grasses have started to kind of flower too, then you might be worried about that weed seed forming in your bed. But depending on the quality of your compost system, so if you're hitting those high temperatures of like 180 degrees or plus, then you're killing weed seeds. So it's really not a problem if you're adding those weed seeds, if you know that you're going to kill them in that your compost will reach those high temperatures. So worry about it if you know that you're not going to get that high temperature, or kind of cut your grass differently or more consistently. If you know that you're hitting those temperatures, just go for it. Add your browns as you do.
Good. Okay, said that makes sense. Yep. Any final questions? I think we answered this question about, there was a question about, should you be worried about cat pooping in your garden beds? But another participant added that yes, there can be some harmful things in the cat feces. You want to try to avoid that.
Well, I do have a recommendation for keeping pest away, but I don't know if might be a little bit too gangster gardening for people.
Gangsta gardening.
Gangsta. Or this might be a little bit too raw. I don't know. If you want to keep pests away, we are the #1 predators. Remember that. So if you mark your territory, they will pay attention. That's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say.
Okay.
Oh, too gangster.
Gangsta gardening from Akello.
All right. Any other questions?
There's lots of comments happening.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that one.
Any recommendation on rats?
Rats. So it's just a matter of keeping your garden clean. So let's say you got tomatoes and tomatoes are just falling and you're not harvesting them fast enough. You need to stay on top of your harvesting. That's what you need to do to keep rats down.
Yep. Okay, guys. Well, it's been a fun panel. And thank you guys for joining us. If there, there was a question from Christina about, do you soak the seeds? Yes, Christina, he did go through the different soaking
Yeah, I can do that really quick for her. Yeah.
Okay.
So Christina, for seed soaking. So I'm not going to do this for super small seeds. So things like chamomile. I'm not just going to do it because it's going to be hard to work with. So I soaked these tomato seeds just now. And so when I had them in here, I kind of swirled it some and then I put them inside of here. There's different specific temperatures that plants like. So like things like brassicas, broccoli, collards, kale, they like to germinate at a temperature of 70 degrees. Things like your solanum crops like tomatoes, peppers, and then your cucurbic crops like cucumbers, melons, they like to germinate at a temperature of 80 degrees. So I don't get too scientific about it. I just boil up some water, have some nice room temperature water in here about halfway or so. And the seed is in there too. And then I just add some hot water, test it out with my finger, see if it's nice and warm, add some more, get it to where I like it. And then I just seal it up and leave the plant in there. So for the different sizes of the plants, something like as big as a tomato seeds or a brassica seeds, things that are really small, I'm gonna leave those in there for maybe 2 to 4 hours. And then things that are bigger, like a melon seed or a snap pea seed or a shelling pea, I'm gonna leave those in there overnight. And yeah. Any other questions, T?
Yeah, sorry, I was just typing out about receiving plants. I think we're at the end here. We will be doing Saturday classes online through this epidemic. So I think next week we're gonna do a beginner gardener class on Saturday. I'll pump that out to folks if you're interested. And let's keep growing. If there's any final questions, I'll keep it open for a second while he's seating. And then give it a couple minutes and I'll just go ahead and end the call. Sharon says, this has been a memorable experience. I truly appreciate the opportunity to learn and share with others who love gardening. Thanks. Oh, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, there's some clapping.
Oh, why, thank you.
Folks are excited to get going. Excited to get going.
Yep. Just remember, you want to watch your watering. You want to keep track of your temperatures and make sure that you have airflow.
Yep. Okay, so like we promised, we'll send out that follow-up information, including the link to this. If it doesn't come automatically, we'll send it manually along with that week-by-week calendar that Kella has. So, Chris, yes, plants. Somebody was asking about the GRP plant distributions. Yes, we are currently planning for the logistics to handle a safe distribution, making sure that we're maintaining our social distancing. So it won't be like the distributions of the past. What we're going to do is once you fill out your application, which I put the link in the chat box, fill out your application. We'll send you instructions on how to sign up for a time frame where we can reduce the number of people. We can also do a curbside pickup of plants. We'll send you all those instructions. Once you fill out your application, you should get all those instructions on how to pick up this go round, this kind of different year for us. So any other questions about the plant distribution or anything else? We'll leave it open for a couple more seconds. Yep, Ashaki says, thanks, Akilo.
Oh, thank you, Ashaki.
Thanks, Magda. We're trying. This technology is new for us.
Oh yeah, shout outs to T. Shout outs to T.
Figuring it out. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and close. You'll get the recording. Let me know if you don't get it. Be safe, guys.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us. I appreciate it.